More than five.
started?
More than 500 registrations we have so far.
Okay. So broadcast has started now. Sir, we shall start now.
Okay, shall I start?
Yes.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the second edition of Virtual ERCP Classroom. And today we'll be speaking on the techniques and skills required for removing the CBD stones. The speaker for today is Dr. Amol Bape, and although he needs no introduction, but in short, I'd like to tell you that he is the endoscopist par excellence, and he has many international and national. He is a regular faculty in national and international conferences and produces very high quality research. And I was fortunate to be associated with him as an advanced fellow, and where I learned both the cognitive and technical skills of the ERCP. And today the topic, as we all know, is how to tackle with the simple and complex CBD stones. So without going with any no more wasting time, I'll call upon Dr. Amol Bape to start this talk. Dr. Amol, sir, please.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to this ERCP virtual classroom. Today is the second session of our interesting webinar series. And those of you who joined us last week, we discussed about cannulation techniques and how to achieve selective cannulation in various situations. And I believe today, again, we have a large number of participation from all over the, all over, I think, quite a few countries as well. So without any further discussion, it's going to be a long topic. So we will directly go to the topic and taking it forward from where we left off last time. We are going to discuss about common bile duct stones, and not only common bile duct stones, but we will also touch upon pancreatic duct stones. The title for today's topic is Boulders, Rocks and Pebbles. And although I have mentioned the biliary stone quarry, we will also touch upon the pancreatic stone quarry in the course of our discussion. So just to give you an overview, 10 to 20% of all symptomatic gallstone disease patients are found to have common bile duct stones. And this incidence increases with age duration of the gallstone disease. And if we look at the history of ERCP, in 1974, when Kawai and Klassen performed the first biliary papillotomy, they performed it in order to remove a stone from the CBD. And 45 years later, we have refinement of ERCP techniques, improved skill, experience, better instrumentation, lithotripsy techniques, imaging modalities, so that today ERCP remains the gold standard for removal of common bile duct stones. CBD stones may be asymptomatic, although that is quite rare. Most patients are symptomatic with a biliary colic. Occasionally, they may present in an emergency presentation with an impacted stone with causing jaundice, cholangitis, or pancreatitis. However, asymptomatic stones or patients with biliary colic should be evaluated for size, number, duration, and location, and the diameter of the bile duct before planning the ERCP. So that is something that we need to keep in mind. And therefore, today's discussion, we're going to discuss a little bit about diagnosis of CBD stones, then endoscopic papillotomy, and then stone extraction techniques, a particular emphasis on balloon sphinctoplasty, lithotripsy techniques we will discuss. We will also anatomy, and we'll discuss about pancreatic stone management. So how do we detect a bile duct stone preoperatively? This is the standard algorithm that many of you all must have seen in many papers all over the world in the last many years. We can classify them into high or moderate or low probability based on imaging, as well as presence of jaundice, as well as the bile duct size on ultrasound, and also the history. But when we take a look at imaging, we need to remember that probably endoscopic ultrasound is the most sensitive of all investigations to detect CBD stones, and it has the highest accuracy, followed by MRCP. And therefore, one should not rely on just a plain ultrasound or a CT scan whenever there is a clinical suspicion or doubt about a presence of a CBD stone or not. And one should never perform a blind ERCP in the year 2020. There is no role for a blind ERCP to look for and possibly remove a CBD stone in this year, in this current scenario. One should always attempt at a pre-ERCP diagnosis. So that is very important. When we come to endotherapy of bile duct stones, 85 to 90% of stones, the patients, conventional methods are effective for bile duct clearance, and that too in a single session. That is with either just a sphincterotomy or extraction of the stone using a basket balloon or a combination of both. So touching upon endoscopic papillotomy or sphincterotomy, as it is also commonly related to, this is the second prerequisite for a therapeutic ERCP to be performed. The first one obviously being selective cannulation, which we discussed last week. Now, although it is also called as a sphincterotomy, possibly papillotomy is a more accurate description, because the full sphincter can never be divided when we are cutting open the sphincter. So we are actually cutting open and exposing the papilla rather than the true sphincter, which is inside the papilla, the musculature. The basic steps are the selective cannulation and then the cut, and we are going to discuss that again in subsequent videos. That 1/3 of the wire should be inside, and the wire should be oriented towards 11 o'clock, and a step-by-step cut should be administered. So here we have cannulated. Now here you can see that the bile duct, here we are orienting the sphincterotome towards the bile duct bulge. And you can also see that as the cut proceeds proximally, we are also correcting the direction. And the other important thing is that one needs to do a complete sphincterotomy so that stone extraction becomes easier. Here you can see, you can go right up to the proximal fold, and that is very important. And orientation, if the orientation is proper, then there will be hardly ever be any bleeding, if you do a step-by-step cut, and that is very important. Here you can see that the bile duct is really bulging over here. So we need to correct the direction. As you start, the cut starts going towards 1 o'clock. So now we are correcting the direction, and a very gentle step-by-step cutting. It is important to note that the sphincterotomy wire is only partly bored. One should not bore the sphincterotomy wire too much, because otherwise that can lead to a zipper cut, and that is definitely something that we all want to avoid, because that can lead to bleeding or occasionally even a perforation. And the proximal end is up to where one can cut. So that is important. Of course, in a patient with an impacted stone, things become much easier because the stone is there to guide you. The bile duct is dilated, and one can just use a needle knife to cut over the stone and gain entry into the bile duct. So we are doing two things at one time. We are getting the stone out, as well as we are cannulating the bile duct using the same step. Here, of course, the stone is a little bit deeply situated, deeply impacted. So it is going to require a little bit more of a cut. Whereas the third one over here, you can see that here a single cut actually just pops the stone out. It is just waiting for it to fall out. You can watch both these videos. In this video, you can see that you can start visualizing the stone is deeply embedded inside. So we are cutting over the stone, using the stone as a scaffold, and layer by layer we are cutting open the sphincter to expose and then deliver the stone out. So we are using a milking maneuver by which the stone gradually gets exposed and then delivered out. There you can see that the stone is almost out. And then finally, you can get the stone out, and then the biliary orifice is opened up, and you can now cannulate the bile duct much more easily. Of course, once cannulation is completed, then one needs to complete the sphincterotomy and then do a subsequent bile duct clearance. Some guidelines to increase the safety of papillotomy. The length of the cut depends on the indication and also on the bulge in the duodenum. And a step-by-step cut is definitely essential to prevent bleeding and also to correct direction. Otherwise, if you just keep cutting in one direction, sometimes the papilla is a little bit twisted, and then you will cut in a wrong direction. So after every few cuts, one should reassess, correct the direction if required, and then proceed further with the cut. It is preferable to use an endocut current. Irby as well as Olympus have the endocut option. However, if that is not available, then a judicious blend of coagulation or cut may be used. However, one has to be careful, because too much of coagulation can lead to charring and pancreatitis, and too much of cut can lead to a bleeding or perforation. So how do we treat a post-papillotomy bleed? Here you will see that there is, once we are doing a sphincterotomy or a papillotomy, a little bit of bleeding starts occurring. The commonest reason why a papillotomy bleeds is because the sphincter has been only partially divided. And if one can see that there is adequate amount of papilla remaining to be divided, first thing one should do is complete the sphincterotomy, and very often that is going to stop the bleeding. Here one can see completion of the sphincterotomy, it will stop the bleeding. Once the sphincterotomy is complete, the bleeding has stopped. Of course, sometimes the bleeding can be much more torrential, and in that situation, one can use a balloon, a stone extraction balloon, to tamponade the sphincterotomy area. There is some bleeding, so what we are doing is we are introducing the balloon and just maintaining it at the papilla and inflating the balloon and holding it there for 3 to 5 minutes. How much time do we hold? There are no guidelines regarding that, but most people would use it for 3 to 5 minutes. If the bleeding does not stop in 3 to 5 minutes, then probably we have to resort to something more. And that could be either a coagulation using either a gold probe or a coag grasper or even an APC. Also, along with that, some epinephrine injection definitely helps to create local tamponade. However, only epinephrine to be used can be used only for small bleeds. If there is a spurting bleeding, it is not recommended to use only epinephrine. One should always combine it with some thermal method or either an endoscopic clip. Applying clips is a little bit tricky through the side wing duodenoscope. Therefore, thermal techniques are definitely preferred in most situations. What is important, however, is to maintain pancreatic duct patency, because we are going to coagulate a lot of things over here in this region, and that could lead to post-ERCP pancreatitis. So ensuring that the pancreatic duct orifice is open definitely protects from, to a certain extent, from post-ERCP pancreatitis. Now, once the papillotomy has been completed, we need to remove the stones. And how do we remove stones? We have baskets as well as balloons as the standard instruments. Along with that, we need dilatation balloons to perform a biliary, sphincteroplasty, as well as one may require mechanical lithotripters, either a through the scope lithotripter or the emergency lithotripter on certain occasions. So this armamentarium is a mandatory toolbox for all individuals who want to start doing ERCP and stone extraction. Please do not start ERCP and try to remove stones unless you've got all these instruments in your basket, because you may get stuck with your first case and then things can get difficult. So once we have a cannulation and a papillotomy, we can remove stones using a balloon, or we can use it using a basket. So here we can see 3 techniques, 3 different procedures where balloon extraction is performed. So what we do is we inflate the balloon. Now you saw that after the papillotomy, the contrast had drained off. So inflate the balloon and pull it down. And as we pull it down, it pulls the stone along with the balloon. Very often this will be adequate, but sometimes we have to pull hard. And when there are multiple stones, it is important to keep in mind that we should not try and take all the stones at one time, because that can lead to problems. The third important thing is, sometimes if the stone is large, one needs to pull at the same time also correct the orientation. What do we mean by orientation? We need to get the endoscope and the pulling direction of the endoscope in the direction of the papilla. So for that, what do? We push the endoscope in. Here you can see we push the scope inside, and then we are pulling. There the stone is out, and then that makes things much easier. Similarly, using baskets, we can do the same thing. Using a basket, very often we need to make more manipulations with the endoscope. Here you can see that the papillotomy is being completed, and then we go ahead. We're introducing a basket, and now gradually the stone is delivered out. Gradually. Here you can see, after completing the papillotomy, there is a lot of sludge coming in. And now the basket has gone inside. And as we are pulling back, what is important to note is we have to catch hold of the stone and then push the scope down. To push the scope down, a little bit of right wheel to the right, on the right wheel, and then pull on the stone, grasp the stone tightly, and then pull on the stone and pull the deliver. 10 to 15% of stones can be called as difficult stones. And why are they called difficult? Because the procedure time can be prolonged, multiple sessions for clearance may be required, or use of special or unconventional tools may be required, like lithotripters and other things, or occasionally, very occasionally, there may be a need for surgery. So this is a truly difficult stone. So how do we define a difficult stone? Well, this kind of a stone can definitely be called as a difficult stone, but sometimes even simple stones can become difficult if we don't follow the correct principles. We need to complete the sphincterotomy. And then you can see over here, we need to, when we are using a Dormier basket, we need to use the basket in a proper way so that we are jiggling the basket and grasping the stone well in the basket. This is very useful when we are doing that for large stones, because otherwise the stones will just slip by the side and the basket will just be empty when you are pulling it out. And here, correcting the orientation and then gradually pulling will bring it down. So while delivering a stone, some tricks. Please don't be a monkey. We need to catch only one stone at a time. The other important thing is we need to learn from our obstetricians. I don't know how many of y'all are close to obstetricians. I am. My wife is an obstetrician, and I've learned a lot about delivering stones and babies from her. So delivering stones is like delivering a baby. And we need to remember that obstetricians don't have the option of performing a lithotripsy when they're delivering the baby's head. So they only rely on correcting the alignment and a continuous traction. So that is what is important when we are delivering a stone. And if we keep that in mind, a large number of stones are going to become easier and easier. So why are stones sometimes difficult? Sometimes it is difficult anatomy, sometimes the stone is difficult, and sometimes there may be patient factors. So sometimes there is a periampullary diverticulum or some other altered anatomy situations, which we will just run through. But periampullary diverticulum is an important aspect because that is something we encounter quite frequently. Again, a good papillotomy is a prerequisite, and we need to correct the direction because the papillotomy may have to be performed in even 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock direction, depending on where the papilla is situated on which wall of the diverticulum. And that is very important. So once a papillotomy is performed, then removing of the stone is quite easy. There is a little bit of increased risk of bleed, but that is overestimated if the direction is good, maintained. Another important few points regarding difficult anatomy situations is that one needs to get a good history, particularly if the patient is a post-operative candidate. Appropriate pre-procedure imaging is mandatory, and we need to use an appropriate scope for the procedure, either a duodenoscope or an enteroscope. And one may need to refer to a higher center if it is a really altered anatomy or a difficult anatomy, and occasionally need to consider surgical or percutaneous options as well. A quick primer about how to do an ERCP in a Billrod 2 situation. We go through the afferent loop and visualize the papilla in a reverse position. Now, this is something that we are using less and less commonly. We are resorting to an EUS guided approach. The cannulation has to be performed at the 6 o'clock direction. We saw that last week using a straight instrument. And once we have cannulated, it is usually important to place a stent. One can either alternatively use a special Billrod 2 sphincterotome, but otherwise we place a stent and then we perform a needle knife sphincterotomy along the stent or over the stent in the 6 o'clock direction. Here you can see that. We are performing a sphincterotomy. Once the sphincterotomy has been performed, the stent is removed. And now we introduce a Dormier basket. One can also introduce a balloon. And then we grasp the stone and we pull it out and we pull it out again, maintaining the trajectory, the proper trajectory. That is important. Nowadays, US guided approach has also come to our rescue, where we go in through the left hepatic duct, take a cholangiogram, and there are multiple stones over here. So we can dilate the tract, we can dilate the papilla, and then push the stones inside into the duodenum using a Dormia basket. Here we are dilating the papilla using a balloon, and now we are using a balloon to push the stones out. Later on, we will also use a Dormia basket, and over the wire basket, we have to dilate even further in this case. And then we are using an over the guide wire basket to grasp the stone and deliver them into the duodenum. So these are just some technical tips in case you encounter difficult situations. But what is most important is difficult biliary anatomy, distal bile duct narrowing. And this is always in relation to the size of the stone, size of the papilla, and the diameter of the distal bile duct. So here you can see that the distal bile duct is quite narrow. The stones proximally are quite dilated, are quite large. And the papilla invariably is small in such situations where you cannot perform a wide enough papillotomy. So what do we do in these situations? Now, this is a very interesting study which actually showed that characteristics of the distal bile duct actually influence the technical difficulty for endoscopic clearance of the bile duct stones. And what they mentioned is that a distal CBD angulation, if it is 135 degrees or more, then clearance of the bile duct is much easier. However, if it is an acute angulation below 135 degrees, then clearance is more difficult and it is technically challenging. So this is very important, and that we have to keep in mind. Now coming to difficult stones. So more than 3 stones in the bile duct, it is classified as difficult stones. And non-round or oval stones, particularly square-shaped stones, are difficult to remove. They tend to get impacted much more easily, either within the bile duct or at the papilla. 15 millimeter size is sort of a cutoff, or if there is a distal bile duct stricture or a narrowing, then that can make things difficult. And either a Mirizi syndrome or intrahepatic stone, based on location, these can be difficult stones to treat. And patient factors, coagulopathy, acute presentation, cholangitis, or a shock, then in these situations, we cannot actually do a stone extraction. We just have to resort to stent placement to temporarily improve the patient's general condition. So what are the principles of stone extraction in this situation? We can either increase the bile duct space by performing a balloon sphincteroplasty. We can either reduce the stone size by some sort of lithotripsy. If we cannot do either of these two things, then of course placement of a stent or pharmacotherapy or occasionally surgery can be considered. But we are going to discuss about the first two options. So coming to balloon sphincteroplasty, it was initially introduced as an alternative to sphincterotomy in the 1980s. However, the initial randomized studies demonstrated an increased risk of pancreatitis by using sphincteroplasty, and therefore it was, it went into disrepute. However, a modified sphincteroplasty was reintroduced in the early 2000s, and in this modified form, we perform a small sphincterotomy before we perform the balloon dilatation. What this does is, there is a reduced risk of bleeding and perforation, and it also separates the pancreatic duct from the bile duct orifice, therefore less chances of pancreatitis. And typically we use a 10 or 20 millimeter wire guided balloon for dilatation, and dilatation is usually less than 60 seconds. So here you can see that there is a distal CBD narrowing with a dilated bile duct with a square shaped stone proximally. And here now we are going to do a balloon sphincteroplasty. So we are introducing the balloon. Now, what we need to remember, many of us are performing balloon sphincteroplasty. And as we introduce the balloon, introduce only a little bit of balloon inside, start inflating, and as you're inflating, put in about 1/3 of the balloon inside the bile duct. Never go more than 1/3 of the balloon inside the bile duct, because otherwise it can try and inflate the entire bile duct, and that can lead to bleeding or perforation. Also, it is important to maintain the position of the balloon, because the balloon tends to slip in or slip out of the bile duct or of the ampulla when we are inflating. Diameter of the balloon is dependent on the diameter of the bile duct that is estimated on the fluoroscopy. So, and also the diameter of the stone. So based on that, we need to decide that. Similarly, over here, cannulating. I'll just skip through some of the videos. A small sphincterotomy. Then we pass a balloon. Now you can see over here that we are inflating the balloon and we gradually getting it out. As the balloon slips out, you can see the inside of the bile duct almost through the balloon. It is important to maintain this position to get an optimal dilatation, because without that, the papilla will not dilate, and then when the balloon dilatation will not be effective. Here you can see. And once the dilatation has been performed, already bile starts flowing out with some small stone fragments, and then one can go in with either a balloon or a basket and get the stones out. Here you can see even a large stone can be taken out like this. Now here you can see what a balloon sphincteroplasty can do. After a balloon sphincteroplasty, you can see the size of the stone over here. It is almost this big. And now you can see that using a balloon, we're trying to get the stone out. And it is really a very massive stone, 5 centimeters. But even this kind of a stone, if the shape is right, one can bring it out just using a balloon sphincteroplasty without having to resort to any kind of lithotripsy. That is what we need to remember. So sphincterotomy versus sphincteroplasty, the stone clearance rate is around the same, and the complication rates are also around the same. However, there is a reduced need for mechanical lithotripsy after a sphincteroplasty, which reduces the procedure time and less exposure to fluoroscopy, and also the cost is much lower, and therefore it is preferred. And these are some studies which actually have shown the efficacy of balloon sphincteroplasty. There are some complications, up to 17% have been reported. Bleeding, which is usually minor and usually self-limiting, but it can be reduced further by a slower inflation and inflation. Don't rapidly inflate or deflate. Pancreatitis can occur if the sphincterotomy is very small or not done, and therefore a small sphincterotomy is definitely mandatory. Perforation is the most serious adverse event, can occur in about 0.4%, but if the size of the balloon is estimated correctly, then the chances of that is much lower. What is important to note is a long stricture in the distal bile duct is a contraindication for sphincteroplasty due to perforation risk. So the sphincteroplasty is actually dilatation of only the sphincter or the papilla. We are not going to be able to dilate the distal bile duct. That is very important to remember. Coming to mechanical lithotripsy, this is now considered as a conventional tool because it is very often used for large stones. The principle is to engage the stone in a Dormia basket and then crush the stone. One can use either a through the scope approach or the salvage or the emergency lithotripsy as the Soyentra lithotripter. And what is important to remember is that whenever we are using Dormia baskets, we need to ensure that these baskets are lithotripsy compatible, because otherwise we can land up in trouble if the basket impacts. And if a basket impacts, then of course one has to resort to mechanical lithotripsy. So this is the through the scope technique. You can see that This is the BML lithotripter from Olympus after a sphincterotomy, wide sphincterotomy. The basket is initially introduced inside. Now there is another instrument which can also be used for mechanical lithotripsy. It is the trapezoid basket from Boston Scientific. However, it is less frequently used. That is, as far as I at least, or we at least use it much less frequently. Here you can see that after the basket has grasped the stone, we push the metal sheath over the basket to close the basket, and then the stone is crushed between the metal sheath and the wires of the basket. And then, of course, the same basket can be used for clearance of the fragments. Here we are also performing a balloon sphincteroplasty. So we need to use a combination of all these techniques. It is not that one uses one and not the other, because finally the aim is to get all the stones out of the bile duct, whether small or big, that doesn't matter. That is very important. And what do we do if our basket gets impacted? It is very important to note that we have to resort to mechanical lithotripsy using the Swahendra technique. So here you can see that we have removed the stone. The stone is held in the Dormia basket. We have removed the scope after cutting the handle of the Dormia basket. And now we have introduced the sheath of the Swahendra lithotripter. And I will run both the videos. That is the sheath of the Swahendra lithotripter being advanced over the basket. Important point to note is, do not remove the plastic sheath, because if the plastic sheath is removed, then the tip of the metal sheath of the Swahendra lithotripter will cause a lot of friction with the basket wires, and the basket wires will break somewhere in between. But if the plastic sheath is maintained, then the sheath will pass smoothly till the tip of the basket and only grasp the stone. So that is very important. And then once the stone is grasped in the metal sheath, we attach the metal sheath to this cranking device, this handle, and ensure that the basket is tightly wound around the cranking device. And then gently, click by click, slowly we have to ensure that the pressure is built up on the stone. If we try to do this very quickly, then the chances are that the basket wires will break, but the stone will not break. So slowly and steadily, you increase the tension so that the basket wires embed and cut through the stone, rather than the basket wires getting fractured themselves. So that is very important. And once that has been done, then the metal sheath can be removed, and then we can introduce the endoscope again and then perform or complete the ERCP. So here you can see how it looks after on the endoscopy view. Here is a stone grasped. You can see that the metal sheath is being tightened. And gradually, as the sheath tightens, it breaks the stone. And then we go in again using a basket. One can also use a balloon in this situation. What is important to note is, what do we do with the basket? There is a chance that one may catch hold of all the stone fragments at one go. And it is important to disimpact the stone fragments from the distal bile duct. And this kind of a jiggling maneuver of the basket will ensure that you hold only a few fragments, then pull them out. And gradually, bit by bit, we clear the entire bile duct. That is very important. Slowly and steadily, and this requires definitely quite a bit of patience, mind you, if the stones are large and multiple. And sometimes one may encounter one fragment which is larger, and that is we are unable to take it out. In that case, the mechanical lithotripsy can be repeated either using the through the scope device or using the mechanical lithotripsy itself, and we can complete the procedure. Clearance of the bile duct after mechanical lithotripsy, that is very important. As I mentioned, don't catch too many fragments, manipulate the basket to grasp the fragments, correct the angulation, and then here you can see that we are grasping the fragments over here. There's a relatively large fragment over here. We are injecting contrast and trying to get all the basket wires around the stone. See, that's quite a large fragment over here. Now the fragment has been grasped well in the basket, and now we are gradually pulling it down. As we pull it down, we push the scope also inside so that we get a better trajectory to pull. And finally, the stone fragments are delivered. Confirmation that a complete clearance has been achieved is very important, obviously. So mechanical lithotripsy has a high efficacy, so around 90% or so. However, very large stones, sometimes it is difficult to grasp the stones within a basket. And if one cannot grasp the stone in a basket, then obviously mechanical lithotripsy cannot be performed. Particularly if the stone is impacted, then mechanical lithotripsy cannot be performed because we cannot grasp the stone in the basket. In that situation, we have to resort to cholangioscopy guided lithotripsy. We use the single operator cholangioscope using either a holmium laser or electrohydraulic energy as a source, as an energy source to blast the stones and then remove the stones. So these are a few of the principles that laser lithotripsy, the wavelength of light is focused on the stone to induce wave mediated fragmentation. And this was earlier introduced many years ago, but currently we use the holmium laser because this is the most effective device. And this was one prospective study published from India on 60 patients where they demonstrated that almost 83% complete clearance within one session and 17% in 2 sessions with minimal complications. So how do we perform this procedure? We take a cholangiogram. You can see that there are multiple large stones. The distal bile duct is narrow. We're doing a balloon sphinctoplasty now. We're introducing the single operator cholangioscope, which is also called the SPY scope currently. That is the only one currently available, although there are quite a few others which are probably likely to come in the next year or so. And then we use the holmium laser as energy to blast these stones. Few pointers how we can blast these stones effectively. It is a non-contact energy, so the laser probe should not be touched to the stone, because if there is contact, then what happens is we create a hole through the stone. So we puncture the stone and we create a hole, but we don't blast the stone. The other important thing is very often we will get larger fragments, but we keep fragmenting the fragments further till they are quite pulverized, so that then clearance of these fragments becomes easier. And let us not stop at just making them into 2 or 3 pieces, so that saves procedure time to a large extent. And then we can use a Dormia basket or a balloon to clear the bile duct. There you can see large number of stone fragments coming out. So some tricks, as I mentioned, balloon sphinctoplasty very often should be performed. It is also easier to introduce the SPY scope once the sphinctoplasty has been performed. The other important thing is, because of the acute angulation while we are introducing the cholangioscope into the bile duct, pushing the laser fiber inside once cannulation has been achieved is very difficult. So it is useful to preload the laser fiber before cannulation. Continuous irrigation is mandatory because we need to maintain a fluid medium to dissipate the energy, and a non-contact firing from about 1 to 2 millimeters from the stone surface. If we touch the stone with a laser fiber, we create a hole in the stone and maximum fragmentation is desirable. Single operator cholangioscopy definitely comes very handy in situations like Mirizi syndrome. And here you can see what happens. Now this is a typical Mirizi syndrome. You can see over there, wait a minute, that there is a stone at junction cystic in the CBD. And here somebody may say that this seems to be in the bile duct, common bile duct. But let us see what happens when we introduce a balloon. When we pass the balloon inside, we inflate the balloon and pull it back. See over here, keep watching over here. There is a jerky movement, a slight jerky movement, and after that the stone slips back because the stone is in the cystic duct and not in the common bile duct, and therefore the balloon comes out empty. There is nothing along with the balloon, and one can never remove these stones using just a balloon or a basket. One needs to resort to single operator cholangioscopy and laser lithotripsy so that we can fragment these stones. So this is the classical appearance of a Mirizi syndrome. We introduce the cholangioscope, and here we can see that there is a stone over there, and it is relatively static in its position, because here you can see that the stone, there's the bile duct. Maybe I'll just go back to that cholangiogram for a moment. You can see that the bile duct, walls are over here. The outline of the bile duct is over here, and the stone is slightly outside the bile duct because it is overlapping the common bile duct, but it is situated inside the cystic duct. That is the reason there is this overlap. It is very important to identify and diagnose Mirizi syndrome on ERCP, on the cholangiogram. Very often imaging, unless it's an MRCP, it will not give you the diagnosis of a Mirizi syndrome preoperatively. Then we use the fragmentation technique and remove the stone fragments completely. Instead of laser, electrohydraulic lithotripsy can also be used. It was used first in ERCP in 1977. The principle is a bipolar probe discharge which sparks in the liquid medium, and this pulse is transmitted as a hydraulic pressure wave and hits the stone to fragment the stones. And this is how it looks. So you have a bubble forming, and then that hits the stone and causes fragmentation. This again is a non-contact technique, and it is the performance is optimal when it is performed under cholangioscopic guidance. We personally have not much experience of EHL, but EHL has been used for a very long time, and this is one video which I have from my archives, which I am just sharing with you. This is using the original Olympus fiber optic mother baby scope system, wherein one had to place also a nasobiliary tube to maintain irrigation and then use EHL to fragment these stones. This video I borrowed from Professor Sohendra's unit. But you can see even at that time in the 1990s, EHL was a very effective technique to fragment CBD stones. And now there are also video baby scopes available which can do the same thing in a much better way. So efficacy of EHL is again quite similar as compared to laser. And comparing laser with EHL, I think laser has a slightly higher capital cost, whereas EHL probe needs more frequent replacement. However, risk of injury is lower with laser as compared to EHL. However, most other efficacy and complications remain the same. ESWL or extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy is another modality which is occasionally sometimes used for fragmentation of CBD stones. It is particularly used for large, very large or very multiple CBD stones, where we perform ERCP and place a nasobiliary tube for localization and for irrigation. And then fragmentation of the stones is performed, used up to fragments less than 5 millimeters in diameter, and then a repeat ERCP is performed to clear the bile duct. The typical intensity is 4, although it may range from 1 to 6, with 11,000 to 16,000 shocks, and frequency is around 90 shocks per minute, and maximum 5,000 shocks per session. The disadvantage of this technique is that the procedure is not one time and it has to be repeated. But imagine a stone of this size, even using laser or electrohydraulic lithotripsy, we will probably spend 3 or 4 hours at least in trying to fragment the stone and clear out all the fragments. In that situation, probably ESWL is definitely more useful and more practical. So this is one of the largest studies on ESWL from the AIG group, more than 1,000 patients, and the outcomes are quite impressive. Some complications of ESWL: hemophilia, cholangitis, pancreatitis, and sometimes ecchymosis. What is important to note is somehow, for some reason, stone recurrence rate of around 14% has been reported at 2 years after ESWL therapy particularly. That is interesting to note. Occasionally, when patients have serious comorbidities, we have with active coagulopathy or sepsis, one only has to place in stents as a temporary or even sometimes a long-term solution in order to effect drainage to reduce the cholangitis. Stents are also known to have some mechanical action on the stones to reduce the size, and they can also facilitate additional maneuvers like cholangioscopy later on once the cholangitis is settled. However, use of additional cholorectic agents is nowadays not advocated, that is not recommended. So stent therapy, and this was an interesting study just about 10 years ago, and a 2-month stenting period with using a 7 French double pigtail stent, and they found that stone clearance was around 93%, wherein earlier that it was much lower. And that is interesting to note, that stents can also be used as a means to reduce the stone size. Therefore, using all these maneuvers, most CBD stones will never go to surgery. 99% of CBD stones are amenable for endoscopic resection. That is what we reported 20 years ago, and I think the success rates have even gone beyond 99% in most hands, I would say. Coming to pancreatic stones, a little bit primer on pancreatic stones and discussion. We need to remember that pancreatic stones are not standalone, but they're always a part of a spectrum of a disease called as chronic pancreatitis, and that is very important to note. And chronic pancreatitis comes in various forms. It can come as only strictures, only stones, strictures plus stones, and so on and so forth. And stones can be present either in the main pancreatic duct or also in the accessory branches, side branches. Particularly, India is the pancreatitis country, and there are particular peculiarities about Indian tropical pancreatitis as compared to the Western world, wherein our patients have a younger age of onset, and history of alcohol is present in only about 20% of patients. Stones are more common than strictures, and exocrine and endocrine damage is quite rampant in these patients. Why are pancreatic stones different than bile duct stones? Usually pancreatic stones are large, multiple, and they are impacted or embedded either in the main pancreatic duct or in the side branches. They are commonly associated with ductal irregularity. They are hard in consistency and have a sharp surface, and are associated often with complex parenchymal disease. And therefore, floating pancreatic duct stones, as you may see in this situation, is quite rare. It is, we can see that in only about less than 10% of situations. We cannulate the pancreatic duct in the 2 o'clock direction. And then one can perform a balloon sphinctoplasty after a small sphincterotomy. One can perform a balloon sphinctoplasty. Again, the size of the balloon will depend on the diameter of the pancreatic duct. Usually it will be much smaller than what we would use for a bile duct. Typically our maximum would be an 8 to 10 millimeters. And then we pass in either a Dormia basket or a balloon. However, most often we prefer to use a Dormia basket because balloons, when we sweep the balloons, there is a chance that stones can get pushed into the side branches. So baskets are preferred. And very often we will use a wire guided basket because otherwise a blind basket cannulation of the pancreatic duct can be quite challenging. A stent should always be placed because typically these kind of stones are associated with a prepapillary stricture, and that stricture needs to be opened up with a sphincterotomy followed by a stent placement, at least for a short term 3 to 6 weeks. Rarely we will find a stone, a pancreatic stone impacted at the pancreatic duct orifice at the papilla, and one can perform a pre-cut to deliver the stone, but this is a rare occurrence. You can see also the bile is draining out because this patient also had biliary obstruction secondary to the stone impacted at the orifice. But this side is the bile duct orifice and the pancreatic duct is traversing towards 2 o'clock. So we keep cutting in that direction and you can see it's an extremely long elongated stone, and then gradually we can deliver it out. There. And then one can cannulate the pancreatic duct and take a pancreatogram and then do subsequent maneuvering after that. However, most pancreatic stones are going to require prior ESWL before we can actually attempt endoscopic removal. One needs a dedicated ESWL machine and an operator, and an optimum localization in 2 axes is desirable, and high intensity, high volume shocks at a short focal length should be performed. These stones are different than renal stones and they require much more number of sessions as well as shocks as compared to renal stones. Multiple sessions are required and often patients have to be under deep sedation with analgesia or epidural or general anesthesia for intensive crushing. And the end point of ESWL is pulverization of the stones, not just fragmentation. So that is very important because the pancreatic duct orifice is very small and the pancreatic juice flow is also very slow, so it's not very rapid flowing system. So once we've got that, then we can go in, we can perform a sphincterotomy and then get the stone fragments out. That is the sphincterotomy, and we are passing a Dormia basket over the wire basket this side. That is a wire guided basket again from Olympus. And then one can get the fragments out. Again, if the stone low burden is very high, we may require more than 1 session of ERCP to clear out all the fragments, and an interim 7 French stent should be placed, and if there is an associated stricture, that should always be treated. That is very important. Endotherapy of pancreatic stones is effective, although not as effective as biliary stones, because as we mentioned, pancreatic stones form a part of the spectrum of chronic pancreatitis, and there are quite a few limitations, particularly stones in the tail, or if the stone border is more than 3 centimeters, or if stones are radiolucent, then that becomes a limitation. Therefore, when we are doing pancreatic endotherapy, selecting the patient is very important, and pain is the only symptom which is worthy of interventional therapy. Most of the other symptoms of chronic pancreatitis do not merit invasive treatment, and all kinds of imaging should be performed before embarking on the ERCP for chronic pancreatitis, and timing is also very important. Never should we perform an ERCP in pancreatitis patients during an acute exacerbation, because there is edema and there is a risk of aggravation of pancreatitis. And one should always have access to ESWL facilities if one is trying to and attempting to treat patients with chronic pancreatitis, particularly calcific chronic pancreatitis. Therefore, friends, to conclude, we've had a long session. Few points as take-home messages. Success of endoscopic CBD stone extraction should be 99% at each one of your centers as well as ours. An optimum papillotomy and maintaining the access of the bile duct while retrieving the stone is an important point to remember for a successful extraction. Balloon sphinctoplasty often makes life very easy and difficult stones may require some form of lithotripsy, either mechanical or single operator cholangioscopy guided. Septic or poor general condition patients, stents should be placed either to temporize and improve the patient's general condition before definitive treatment can be performed, and also in refractory cases when other options are not possible for some reason. Pancreatic stones typically are more difficult to treat, invariably require ESWL prior to extraction, and they're often associated with strictures or complex disease, and therefore require an individualized treatment approach. With that, I would like to thank you, and I would like to thank Chalapati and Tarun, both of them, for moderating this session. And this video, as well as today's recording, as well as the earlier recording, and the next week's recording, all three of them will be uploaded on our YouTube channel, Free Endoscopy, after all these three sessions are over. So please follow our YouTube channel and subscribe to that, so that you keep getting regular updates. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for the wonderful lecture. So, as always, we have few questions. I would like to take up a few of them, dividing your lecture into certain categories. So, so regarding the papillotomy, there are a few questions about when do you stop doing a papillotomy? What is the landmark when you actually start doing a papillotomy? What do you see?
Right. Now, I was actually, I did mention a little bit about that, although probably there could have been an additional slide for that, but it's difficult to put it on a slide. Let me tell you. See, there are, as I mentioned, the size of the papillotomy depends on the size of the papilla, size of the distal bile duct, and size of the stone. All three factors we have to keep into consideration. Now, as an anatomical landmark, the proximal transverse fold is the upper limit or the outer limit of the papillotomy. One should never cross that limit. Having said that, if the distal bile duct is narrow but the papilla is large, never try to attempt a papillotomy which is larger than what you estimate as the bile duct diameter on fluoroscopy is, because then you can land up with the perforation. Similarly, sometimes the papilla is small, but the distal bile duct is quite wide, but it tapers down rapidly into a small papilla. In that kind of a situation, one should rather resort to a small papillotomy followed by a balloon sphincteroplasty rather than trying to cut open the entire bile duct. That is very important. And also, if the stone is large, you either need to have a wide opening, wide enough. It's your choice whether to do a papillotomy or a sphincteroplasty, or alternatively, then you will have to use one of the lithotripsy techniques to reduce the stone size. So we have to optimize the size of the papillotomy to the size of the stone that we are trying to get out.
Yeah. So certain things about the complications when you're doing a papillotomy, if there is a delayed bleed, so what do you do? Maybe
delayed bleed. Yeah. See, if there is a delayed bleed means typically within 12 to 24 hours after the procedure. So the procedure has, the patient has gone back to the wards or the room, and then the patient may either present with shock or hematemesis or altered blood or even hematochezia or melena. And if there is hemodynamic instability, then we need to re-intervene. We need to go in with the scope inside. What is important to note is we need to have an irrigation apparatus in place. You may want to use a gastroscope to wash the duodenum, because invariably you will find a large amount of clotted blood over there. And unless you remove all those clots, you're not going to be able to identify the bleeding source. So an irrigation system in the gastroscope usually works. The ERCP scope does not have that, unfortunately. So you have to keep flushing through the flushing port of the biopsy channel. So clean up the area and then try and identify the bleeding spot. Usually you will find the bleeding spot at the apex of the papillotomy. And once you have identified the bleeding spot, the most optimal approach would be to inject using 10,000 adrenaline or epinephrine, and then follow it up with either thermal therapy, either coagulation or an endoclip. As I mentioned, applying an endoclip at the apex of the papillotomy can sometimes get very tricky. And if one can do that, that's very good. Otherwise, a thermal method is very useful. If we are resorting to a thermal method, one should, if one already has a stent in the pancreatic duct, then that is definitely a blessing. If that is not the case, then it would be a little bit doubtful to try and probe the pancreatic duct just to get a stent inside for that reason. But at least what one can do is try and remain away from the pancreatic duct orifice. That is to say, the coagulation, the gold probe or the coagrasper forceps that we use should be aimed towards the bleeding point alone, and one has to hold the bleeding spot and then only coagulate. So a point coagulation works better rather than a just wide field coagulation. That should be important. I don't think I have missed out anything. If it is really fresh after the papillotomy and after the procedure, one could attempt a balloon tamponade, but delayed bleed, I think balloon tamponade is less effective.
Right. So one question which is common is, what is your preference for routine stones? Is it a basket or a balloon? By Dr. Ravindra.
Okay. So I trained on baskets, and then we all get our nightmares with baskets on and off. And so we moved to balloons. And then after that, we realized that not all stones can be removed by balloons. So you again have to go back to baskets. So it is a choice between the two. It's not one or the other. Now, if you ask me, I still prefer a basket. I would say 60-40 or so. But provided I'm quite sure that I'm going to be able to get the stone out. If there is any doubt, then I will use a balloon. And particularly if my cannulation, see, it also depends on how easy your cannulation is after the papillotomy. Sometimes you may have an intradiverticular papilla where cannulation is difficult. Even after the papillotomy, the papilla is not coming face on. At that point in time, you don't want to retrieve the wire and try a freehand cannulation using a basket. It's safer to keep a wire inside, put in a balloon, trawl the balloon over the wire, and then get the stones out. That is much easier. As a guideline, I would definitely say for beginners, start with balloons because they are less risky to use. You may encounter situations where some stones are not amenable for balloon clearance, particularly small stones in a wide duct, widely dilated duct. Very difficult to clear out completely using balloons because the stones keep slipping by the side of the balloon. And there one has to use a basket. In that situation, a flower basket is very useful. So those kind of situations, one can resort to a basket. That's how it is.
Yeah. So when you are using any basket, you did mention that it should be, lithotripter compatible. So do you have a choice between the various kinds of baskets? Like there are many baskets available and lithotripters available. So what is your choice?
Right. See, when we talk about lithotripsy baskets and lithotripter compatible baskets, there is a subtle difference between the two.
Yes.
Lithotripsy baskets is the basket which comes along with your BML lithotripter. Now that is a large basket and that comes as the set where there is a basket with the plastic sheath and then there is a metal sheath over the basket that is there. The basket can of course be replaced by another basket. It's quite a large basket actually. I think the size is 3 by 6 centimeters or 2.5 or 5. I don't remember exactly, but I think approximately that size. When we talk about lithotripsy compatible baskets, these baskets can be used as standalone baskets, but in case the basket gets impacted and one has to use the emergency lithotripter, the basket wires are designed in such a way that all the forces are directed towards the tip of the basket, the wires of the basket, so that they will be directed on the stone and not in the mid body of the basket, because otherwise when you are applying you're performing Sohendra lithotripsy, the biggest risk is that the basket wires snap in the mid body of the basket. Then you have the basket tip with the flower of the basket catching hold of the stone. A short segment of basket wires, dangling on that flower within the patient in the duodenum or back in the stomach, and you have no access to it because you have already, your basket is broken, so you are not able to catch hold of it, and you can't bring the other tip inside. And that kind of a situation is it is almost a nightmarish situation. One will have to go in with a single operator cholangioscope and laser lithotripsy and fragment the stone then and there, or try and get a nasobiliary catheter and perform an ESWL to fragment the stone. Or if both these are not available, then probably subject the patient to emergency surgery. So which is a difficult task to do.
Right.
So
Yeah.
these baskets are the ones which are compatible. So these baskets, so the Olympus baskets are compatible with lithotripsy compatible baskets, as well as the trapezoid basket is a lithotripsy compatible basket because it is designed to work as a mechanical lithotripter in case straightforward stone extraction fails. But that also comes with a metal sheath along with. So that is also a lithotripter. Technically speaking, that is a lithotripter basket in any case.
Right. So when you're catching a big stone, so are there any maneuvers that you follow when you're using a basket to grab it?
Yeah. So as I mentioned and I showed in some of the videos, see, you need to have a lot of coordination with your technician and yourself. As we pull and push the basket in and out of the bile duct, the technician opens and closes the basket in rapid maneuvers. I don't know whether I'm visible over here on this, so I'll just put my hand over here. So
Yeah,
what my technician is doing is rapidly jiggling the basket in and out, open close fashion, whereas I am pulling the basket, pulling and pushing the basket with the scope in hand. And with that, what happens is the basket wires tend to open up and go around the stone. We can use fluoroscopy as a guide with or without contrast and some amount of contrast. Don't put too much of contrast, but put enough contrast so that the stone is visualized well. And then try and get the basket wires around the stone. Sometimes one also needs to manipulate the endoscope so that the basket wires come in a different angulation and from a different approach, so that they'll go over the stone and then grasp the stone in a better way.
right. So it is all involves a lot of coordination between the
Yes.
assistant. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So Dr. Tarun, do you have any questions?
But although there are a lot of questions, I don't know how much
Yeah.
time you will allow us. So there are still 8 or 9 questions which can be asked, and we still have more than
I think we have about, I think we can take about another 8 minutes or so. It is 1842. 1850 we should close at all costs because
Right.
there is best of DTW which is starting at 7
Yeah,
o'clock.
7 o'clock.
Everybody wants to attend that as well.
Right.
So
Okay.
let's keep
just-
our eyes on the watch and
So just I have one
1850
question.
we
Sir.
will-
I just asked one question. When you are
Yeah.
using EUS guided approach for clearing the CVD with stones,
Yes.
how easy it is to push the accessory compared to pulling an accessory during a traditional ERCP?
Tarun, it is definitely not easy, and these are only exceptional situations. That video is not, it has not been shown with the intention that everybody starts, doing their CVD stones by an EUS guided approach. It is only when the papilla cannot be approached because there is duodenal narrowing because of, whatever scarring or something else. Only a gastroscope can go in, but a duodenoscope cannot go in. In that kind of a situation, one can resort to this approach. And that is how it is. So these are exceptional situations, but it is very difficult to push the stones rather than pulling them out of the bile duct.
And so would you like to elaborate on the settings of SPY machine? What settings you are using when you are doing SPY lithotripsy?
The laser,
Yes.
okay, so the laser is, see, typically we start with a millijoule setting of around 15 to 20. and one should never go beyond 25 to 30. That is for sure. So that millijoule setting is that much, and millijoules is calculated according to the frequency as well as the intensity both. So the number of pulses and the intensity both are important. So most of the specifications, even the manufacturers will tell you, because laser companies also, there are 3 or 4 laser machines which are nowadays available. So they have some subtle differences in their calculation of the millijoule, the intensity. So they will be able to guide us about the stone intensity. But in principle, start with the lowest possible and then step it up as required. Don't go with the highest intensity.
And sir, one more question. Somebody asked this, whether you do a complete sphincterotomy with sphincteroplasty or just do half, or what? What's your recommendation in combination?
Right. So whenever we are doing a sphincteroplasty, there is no need, and one should in fact not perform a full sphincterotomy. One should only perform a partial sphincterotomy and then enlarge the opening further using the balloon. That is because if you do a complete sphincterotomy, then the muscle and the sphincter muscle is already divided, and that can create undue pressure on the bile duct and the duodenal wall, and that can lead to a perforation. So one should not do that. So partial sphincterotomy followed by sphincteroplasty.
And sir, is it always mandatory to do a sphincteroplasty prior to spyglass?
Well, it is desirable. I will not say it is mandatory. If your sphincterotomy is wide enough and if your introduction of the spy scope is very easy, you may choose not to do. But in a large number of situations, it is definitely desirable.
And so your experience on using SEMS in post-sphincterotomy bleeding?
As exceptional situations, particularly in the scenario of portal biliopathy, I did not touch upon portal biliopathy with CVD stones because that becomes a topic of its own. There is a limit how much we can cover in 40 minutes. So, but in that kind of a situation, if there is bleeding from inside the bile duct, then probably a fully covered metal stent would be useful. For bleeding at the papilla, I think the measures that we discussed are good enough in most of the situations. One does not really need a SEMS. But if the bleeding is from inside the bile duct, then none of these measures are going to be useful, and we will need tamponade inside the bile duct, which can be provided by the fully covered metal stent.
And so when you are doing sphincteroplasty, do you use contrast or normal saline? Because in contrast, the advantage is the obliteration of waste can be seen.
Ideally, it is recommended to use contrast, but because in India we reuse our balloons, the balloons get damaged very rapidly if you use contrast because they stick to each other and cannot be reused that frequently. So we prefer to use saline. But as a scientific recommendation, I would definitely say that one should use contrast whenever possible, and if the cost is not the issue.
Okay. Dr. Jalpati, can you take a few more questions and we can close? Last 2 or 3 questions we can take. Then we can close the session.
Yeah, so a few questions about the pancreatic stones, sir. So what are the ideal stones when you take up for ESWL?
Right. So 2 to 3 stones or single stones in the pancreatic duct are best treated by ESWL because the number of sessions and the number of shocks required will be manageable, and with that ESWL can be performed and then the stones can be removed. The other important thing is if the patient has a nice widely uniformly dilated pancreatic duct with just a prepapillary narrowing or a stricture, then these are the patients who are going to do the best after pancreatic stone extraction. If they've got multiple strictures within the pancreatic duct with a chain of lakes appearance, and if they have stones within these lakes, then these stones are going to be more difficult to extract. Even if we remove the stones, the strictures are going to be more refractory, and strictures in pancreatic duct, we can discuss that next week, but I can just give a pointer that prepapillary strictures are best treated when we are doing pancreatic stricture management, but strictures deep in the body of the pancreas are even more difficult to treat by endotherapy. So these strictures are more refractory and they don't open up that well. So that is a challenge.
Right. So going back to the bile duct. So do you stent all cases after complete clearance of bile duct? That is one question.
Again, scientifically, it is not mandatory nor recommended to stent every patient after stone extraction, provided we are sure and we are confident that complete clearance has been achieved. However, many surgeons in India particularly do recommend and they prefer stents in the bile duct because then they are more comfortable handling the gallbladder when they are performing the cholecystectomy laparoscopically, and they are not overtly worried that another stone may slip into the bile duct and cause trouble in the postoperative period. So we respect their wishes, and very often we do place stents within the bile duct after stone clearance, although even though we may be confident that the clearance has been complete, but scientifically speaking, there is no need to do that.
Yeah. So there are still many questions. I'm sure it will be addressed in your future sessions, sir. So finally, if you would like to have an announcement of the upcoming ISG, we just got a recent email because you are the organizing secretary.
Yeah, actually, I will just tell you one thing, that ISG has been converted to a virtual meeting,
Right.
which will be predominantly, broadcast, and it will be conducted by the central ISG committee. Of course, Pune, since we have been, allotted ISGCon 2020, we will be, participating in this in some way, but still discussions are on this matter. And very soon, the IIG Governing Council and the Secretariat will touch upon this with all the general body members and the IIG members regarding this. So
Right.
just wait, and probably everybody is waiting for the COVID situation to settle down. I cannot say normalize because we nobody knows when it will normalize.
Yes.
But the COVID situation has to settle down or at least plateau before we can think of anything beyond that. So that seems to be the situation.
So really, it's a wonderful session. As always, we enjoyed your videos, your lecture, and your expertise. So thank you so much, sir. And we thank Olympus for organizing this, and thank all the participants for their active participation. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Jalapati. Thank you, Tarun.
Thank you, sir.
And
Thank you very much.
one last announcement to all the participants. I know that a large number of questions today may not have been answered. I would recommend that any of these questions, once the videos are uploaded on the YouTube site, you could go onto the website and on the YouTube site and post your questions over there. And we will be happy to take these questions and we will address them each one by one. So just have patience, and we will ensure that each of your questions gets answered in due course. Keep watching us and keep following us, and we look forward to seeing you next week, next Friday again at 5:30 on ERC, on the third session, which is on stricture management, biliary as well as pancreatic stricture management. So until then, stay healthy, stay safe. Goodbye.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very
Goodbye,
much.
sir. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your time and the session.
Yeah, you can stop the recording, Varun.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that we don't